Hello chess friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel. So this is the game played between Levon Aronian and Arjun Erigaisi. This is basically played in the ongoing tournament Road to Miami. It's a very interesting tournament. There are really good games. Yesterday I think even Anish played a very nice night of masterpiece. Definitely something to check out. So here's a very interesting game of how to think like a grandmaster. Basically this is my fourth video in the series and all the examples are really instructive. I think the previous videos have games of Fischer and Spassky, Petrosian, and how they think, how they make their moves. It's really instructive. And this example is also very instructive. I think there is so much happening in this position. So let me just take you to this position. Yeah, so we're gonna take a look at it from the black point of view, Arjun's point of view, who went on to win this game. This is seriously brilliant. Now he just played the move bishop to g4, which is actually an inaccuracy, and now Levon plays f3. It's a good move, basically provoking him, basically asking him to take the pawn. Black takes the pawn. The idea is not for white to capture it back, but actually to play knight to f5. This is what Levon played, and now if you observe, this bishop on h5 is stranded. This bishop on f8 is not active at all. It has no squares. It's a defensively good piece, but I don't think the black needs, because there are queens, no longer any queens on the board. I don't think the bishop's I think the bishop's role on f8 has been fulfilled. He needs to find a way to get in the game, but he cannot. So both the bishops are out of the game. What about the rook? Well, check out the squares. All of them are covered by the bishops excellently, and that's why the rook doesn't have an entry square from there. So it seems like black is in a serious trouble. And the idea of knight f5 is obviously, well, to capture the pawn on d4, followed by to capture the b5 pawn. In fact, there is not much that can be done. In fact, even something like knight c6 after capturing the d4 pawn is really good. White is simply up a very healthy pawn with the bishop pair, so active bishop pair, and this is very simple for white. Actually, if you check out the engine evaluation, it is +2 or something. It's completely winning for white. From this point onwards, the way Arjun continued is really instructive. So how does a grandmaster think? He is a very strong grandmaster and he's soon going to be 2700. There's no doubt about it. He's just crushing everyone else. So the question you should ask yourself is, where do my pieces belong? What are the perfect ideal squares for my pieces? I'd very much like for the knight on f6 to reroute itself to e5 or c5, or even in some cases to c4. Right? This is quite a nice square. Specifically, I'd say e5 square is really good. Right? So one way to get the knight over there is knight d7, knight e5. Okay, great. What about the bishop? What about this bishop? I'd very much prefer the bishop to be actively placed on the c5 square, right? If that can be achieved, the bishop would be really well placed on the c5 square. So knight on e5, bishop on c5. What else? This bishop, which has been stranded away, I'd very much like to retreat it, maybe somewhere along this diagonal, and he can put some pressure along here, do something. At least on the d7 square, he's much active. So this is what I want. I want my knight on e5. I want my bishop on c5. I want my rook to get in the game. And I want this bishop back in the civilization. I want him either on d7 or on b5 square. That's the ideal setup. The question is, can we achieve it? We have a serious problem here. These bishops are really problematic. Can we solve our problems? Actually, we can. And although we are going down a pawn, we are going to get a lot of activity. This is what Arjun played, and he played it very quickly with very few seconds on the clock. Knight to d7. Well, there are multiple ideas behind this. The first is obviously the knight is going to the e5 square from where it has access to a lot of squares, specifically the c4 square, right? Which can target this and this. So that's an idea. Apart from that, we are also freeing up the f pawn, and you will see the point of this. This is really ingenious. Rook c1. Levon is saying, let's exchange the rooks. This is the only active piece that black has. Although he cannot infiltrate, this is still the only active piece for the moment that black has. So it's always a good strategy to exchange the good pieces of your opponent. Arjun obviously logically says, no, I do not want to exchange. Now there's knight takes on d4. White is up a pawn. Knight e5. The knight comes back in the civilization. Finally, now we have bishop f4. Here a slightly more accurate move would have been bishop c3. But obviously, when you have so less time on the clock, it's not so easy. Bishop f4 looks very logical. Now we have pawn to f6, and this is really good. Knight is not only protected, knight loves to be, secure like this. Knight likes to be on his square where he has a lot of protection like this, and he's really happy over here. What about the other things? Well, the bishop finally can come back to civilization on f7 or on e8, and actually he's guarding the c6 square. At least that would be better than the bishop on h5. So a lot of problems that black has, he's able to solve them right now. Knight takes pawn, rook to b8. Now, if you move the knight back, the b2 pawn drops and you are no longer a pawn up. How do you hold the extra pawn? There's only one way. You need to play bishop to d3, but right now that's not possible because of the knight. So it's very simple. You take this. How do you capture back? As black, ideally you would like to capture with the f pawn, right? Not allowing any kind of passed pawn for white. But here in this situation, looking at the poor bishop on f8, actually this is the best capture. Just trying to get the bishop out, and we have actually solved a lot of problems in the last few moves. This is amazing. Rook is suddenly a very active piece. He's threatening some things. The bishop has found some life, and this bishop is very soon going to come back to the e8 square. So although we are down a pawn, we have found a really good activity for our pieces and really the best square possible. So let's go forward. Bishop b3 played. Bishop e8, putting a lot of pressure on the knight. Knight has to finally move. Knight goes to c7. Obviously going back simply drops the b2 pawn with the rook. So not ideal. So knight c7 comes with a idea. If you take on b2, you can see the problem. All of you can see the problem. Knight attacks the bishop on e8. So bishop d7. Now here Arjun understands that the situation has changed. Now he's the one who has a bishop pair, and those bishops are really important. Specifically the bishop on f8. Now throughout his life, this bishop has been defending. When there was queens on the board, he was defending the h6 pawn by putting itself on f8. But right now, if you understand position well, you like to preserve it. Bishop d6 was played. Now why was this bishop preserved? Isn't the knight on e6 stronger than the bishop on f8? Yes, he is for the moment. But if you look at the position carefully, all the pawns for white, most of the pawns are on the light squares. He has a light square bishop. That's a bad bishop. It still remains a bad bishop. And which means as all the pawns are on the light squares, the dark squares are going to be seriously weak, right? And that is why we would very much prefer to keep our dark square bishop, because there is no counterpart for it. White does not have any counterpart for the bishop. That's why you play bishop to d6. You have to have a lot of positional understanding to make such moves. Rook to b1, protecting his pawn. King f7. You can see every single of black's piece is now coming in the game. Let's go back to this position. When this bishop was trapped, this bishop has no squares, the rook has no square, knight is doing nothing on f6. And coming back to this position, black has really solved all of his problem, and this is really tremendous. He just found out the best square for his pieces and somehow he arranged them accordingly. So let's continue. We have bishop c4, g6, b3, rook a8. Now he's actually being very ambitious here. G4, rook to a2. Whose rook is more active? Definitely the black rook. In fact, he's making sure that the white king cannot join the fight. So the king remains passive, whereas our king actually is much more active, right? He's actually defending everything in the black position. Nothing is hanging. So this is really good. Rook c1 played, king e7, protecting everything. Rook to c3, bishop to b4. Again, which piece is better? Is this bishop on c4 better or this bishop on b4? Generally, um, it's the piece that is more attacking. I think the bishop on c4 is really stuck over here. He has no squares. He's like a tall pawn over there. Whereas the bishop on b4 can actually come into the game quite strongly, right? He has a lot of squares. d2, e1, and we will see that he plays a major role in the attack. So definitely black's pieces, although black is still a pawn down, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, black is still a pawn down, but the activity that he has is tremendous, and this is what you should play for. Rook to c1, h5. Again, Arjun is being so ambitious here. All he wants is to bring the h pawn and combine with the bishop pair and the rook on the 7th rank. They can actually create a very strong threat, maybe mating nets. GH, we have king h1. There's a point behind this. You want to vacate the square for the rook to go here. That's why king h1. h4, rook to g1. Now king to d6, a prophylactic move. Before rook joins the attack, you just put your king on d6. Rook g7, we have bishop e1. Finally, the bishop joins the attack. Now, we'd very much like to put it here, and basically we're trying to create a mating net. In case this knight moves, the bishop has access over here, and there are some really strong back rank checkmating threats. So Arjun has achieved a lot. I think the situation is trying to change now, completely flipped up. Knight to d8. Now there can be some annoying checks like this one. You want to avoid it. That's why bishop to c8. Just a very calm move by Arjun. He knows how to make prophylactic move. He knows when to attack, when to defend. He just don't completely focus on attack. You have to make such moves in order to save your position. You have to take your opponent seriously. Aronian is not a weak player. He was number two for a very long time. Knight f7 check. King to c5. So you see again whose king is better. This king is about to join in the attack, and it's basically the number of attackers. It's not about the number of pawns or whatever you have. It's number of attackers. Also, you cannot play b4 at the moment because just king takes bishop. Yeah, with the king joining the attack, this will just be finished all over, right? So here Aronian has a very interesting tactic. He finds knight takes pawn. Basically, if you take, there is this move rook c7 getting back the piece, so it's not really a piece sacrifice, right? King to d4. This move reminds me of the Capablanca game against Taktakova. Very interesting king walk, just giving up some material. Actually, white is up 2 pawns now, but the amount of activity, the amount of piece play is too much for white, for black, for Arjun. Knight to c6 check, king e3, just going there. d6, now there is a threat obviously, you want to play d7, get the bishop, and then maybe checkmate is not possible. Here actually bishop to g3 wins. That's what the engine suggests, but you know, these players have few seconds on the clock. And here's what I'll show you. Peter Lecco said this about this particular game. This was one of the most spectacular sequence of moves with a few seconds on the clock that he has ever seen. So the next few moves are really going to be instructive. Just pay attention. First bishop h3, right? You would like to avoid this threat. At the same time, the bishop is very useful taking cover of the squares. Now the threat of bishop g3 and back rank mate is really powerful. Bishop f1. This basically is a deflection tactic because right now you can't push a pawn, right? If you try to push a pawn, I might even sacrifice my bishop. So it's in a way a deflecting tactic, a very good defense by Levon. Bishop takes f1. So actually both the players are making really high class moves. We have d7. The pawn is about to promote. Bishop e2. And black is about to make his mating net around the king, whereas white is about to promote his pawn. Let's see what happens. White promotes his pawn to a queen. We have bishop f3 check. Now there are two options. Rook g2 was played. You might ask what happens if king g1. Well, this is just game over after bishop f2 check. King here. This is a double check followed by a mate. If you go here, simply rook h2, and if you go here, this is mating 2. Just rook check, queen blocks, we capture, and that's mate. So you cannot play this. You cannot play king g1. You have to play rook to g2. Basically, you're trying to get some time. You want some checks. Basically, what Aronian is trying to do is get some perpetual check. Rook takes g2, and he would have got it. Now, here's a very difficult move to see. With few seconds on the clock, Levon played the most logical move in the position, queen d4. Now, this is the most human move, the most logical move. Engines are suggesting queen b6. For some reason, they suggest queen b6 is a draw by perpetual checks. And in a game, this is just so difficult to see. Why is queen b6 working and not queen d4, right? Because the queen on d4 actually looks like a more natural move. It has it's more flexible. You're taking control of more squares, right? This is obviously much more logical, and that's what happened, right? Queen d4 is what happened, but this is actually completely lost. Black now plays brilliant move, king e2. Again, one of the most spectacular sequence of moves, right? Check, king f2, check, king f1, and this is basically where Aronian resigned the game because of the queen c4. There's a very simple move. You answer a check with a check of your own. Bishop f3 check made. Beautiful game. The ending was very instructive, but the most instructive part was this one at this point. Black's pieces are terrible. This is nearly a lost position. If you check this with an engine, white is completely winning. Turn this position into what we have on like in the next 5 to 10 moves is really amazing. So what he did was he thought, okay, what is the best square for my knight? It's e5. I'll try to put it on the e5 square. I like to get my bishop out. with bishop to e8, f6 and bishop e8. Also, this bishop can come in the game at some point, and my rook can come in the game via this. So basically, he imagined all of this. This is called as abstract thinking, right? He imagined all of it and he made it work. Knight f5, 97, rook a8, 95. f6 was amazing move, and yeah, taking with the d pawn again. It shows such an understanding of the game. Bishop e8, and at this point, actually, black already is quite okay. Is doing quite okay over here, and at this point, he just got an advantage. You can see the moment we got h5, yeah, black is completely fine. Although he's a pawn now, just compare the pieces. This bishop is doing nothing. He's a tall pawn. This bishops are amazing, amazing rook, and the h pawn obviously creates. He's the main reason for black's victory, right? He helped a lot. So amazing game by Arjun. I think this is what I really found instructive. The way he saved himself from this nearly lost position. I think most of us would have just got crushed. Specifically, if you're playing against Levon Aronian, a player of his class, you would have just got crushed. The way he made this comeback, and this is not just in this game. I think he has made several such comebacks because of his understanding. It's not nothing to do with luck. I don't think chess has anything to do with luck. I think this is simply because of his understanding of how he got his pieces out. Awesome game, really, really instructive game. So hope you enjoyed this video. Think like a grandmaster. That's how grandmaster think. They ask themselves which is the best square for my piece and how can I get there, and they do it. So thank you for watching. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time.